Chapter 1. Public humiliation. The bells of St. George's Chapel tolled in a slow, heavy rhythm, echoing against the pristine white marble walls and dissolving into the biting air of a late autumn morning. Each chime fell like a hammer strike against Lady Eleanor Vance's chest. She stood before the massive oak doors, draped in a white satin wedding gown that was frayed at the hem, a hastily altered heirloom from her late biological mother. There was no hand-woven French lace veil, no royal pearl tiara, nor any diamond necklace to prove her standing. There was only a hastily woven wreath of wildflowers resting upon her chestnut hair, its petals already wilting from the London chill. Eleanor was 19. For the past 15 years, she had been hidden away in the bleak countryside of Yorkshire, residing in her family's decaying estate simply because she possessed no dowry and was deemed by her stepmother as too ordinary, lacking any value for investment. And now she had been summoned back to London, not to participate in the season, but to be sold to Baron Hastings, a 60-year-old man with teeth stained by cheap cigars, lecherous eyes that constantly roved over the maids' chests, and a grotesque bulging stomach. He was purchasing her solely to clear the monumental gambling debts of Viscount Vance, her own father. The oak doors swung open with a heavy creak. Light from the stained glass windows spilled down the red-carpeted aisle, painting speckled rays upon the floor. The interior of the chapel was packed to the brim. Hundreds of pairs of eyes belonging to London's high society, the Tunnerls, countesses and viscounts in their glittering attire, instantly locked onto her. They resembled a flock of black crows, waiting to dissect a weak prey. The whispers began to rise, spreading as swiftly as fire on dry grass. "Look there, is that the eldest Vance daughter? She looks like a maid straight out of the scullery. I heard she was hidden in the country due to an affliction of the mind. Pity the Baron Hastings, how pathetic. The Vance lineage is as good as ruined." Eleanor pressed her lips tightly together, her spine as straight as a proud reed in a storm. She looked at no one, allowing not a single emotion to betray her pale, delicate features. She walked down the red carpet, her gaze fixed upon the crucifix above the altar, where Baron Hastings stood beside her father. Hastings wore a garish red velvet suit, sweat glistening on his balding forehead as he twirled a faux gold-headed cane. Beside him stood Viscount Vance, offering obsequious, fawning smiles. Every step Eleanor took was pure agony. She could hear the muffled, mocking giggles of her beautiful stepsister, Isabella, standing in the front pew alongside her stepmother, Lady Vance. Isabella was adorned in an expensive azure taffeta gown that rightfully should have been reserved for the bride. The contrast between the two sisters was glaringly obvious, as if deliberately showcasing Eleanor's cheapness. Just as Eleanor stopped 3 paces from the altar, and the priest prepared to open the leather-bound Bible, Baron Hastings abruptly raised his hand. The bulky gold ring on his plump finger flashed under the candlelight. "Halt!" Hastings' gruff, raspy voice echoed through the chapel, cutting off the organ's prelude. "This wedding is cancelled." The entire chapel seemed to stop breathing. The silence stretched for a second before erupting into gasps of shock. Viscount Vance's eyes bulged, his face turning a deep shade of purple as he stuttered, taking a step forward. My Lord Baron, what is the meaning of this?" "We had an agreement." Hastings sneered, his eyes sweeping over Eleanor from head to toe with absolute disdain, as if she were a dead rat on the carpet. "Did you take me for a fool, Viscount Vance? You promised me the southern estate as a dowry, promised me shares from the merchant ships in India. But this morning, my solicitor discovered that the estate has already been mortgaged to the banks, and your merchant ships sank half a year ago." Hastings turned to the aristocratic crowd, his voice raised to ensure not a single word was missed. "And you intended to marry me to this useless, plain, penniless daughter to clear your debts? An empty shell bearing a noble title?" Eleanor froze. The humiliation crashed down upon her like a bucket of freezing water dashed straight into her face. She could have endured a loveless marriage. She could have tolerated it to save her family from bankruptcy. But to be made a laughingstock, to have her betrothal broken right at the altar before the entirety of London's elite, it was a vicious degradation beyond imagination. She felt hundreds of knives slashing at her. The mocking laughter was no longer concealed. They pointed, they offered fake pity, they reveled in her downfall. "You useless wretch," Viscount Vance roared, turning to Eleanor. He swung his hand, delivering a stinging slap across her cheek. The sharp sound echoed piercingly. "What did you do to displease the Baron?" "You worthless girl." Eleanor stumbled back half a step, the crimson burning imprint of 5 fingers blossoming on her left cheek. Her ears rang, but she did not cry. She bit the inside of her lip until it bled to hold back the tears threatening to fall. She knew that if she shed a single tear now, the Tun would trample her without mercy. Her stepmother, Lady Vance, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, stumbled up to the altar. She dragged her precious daughter, Isabella, along, weeping falsely as she dabbed the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. "Please, my Lord Baron, calm your anger, please be forgiving. Our Eleanor has always been stubborn, clumsy, and ignorant in the ways of serving a man. The fault lies in her shortcomings, pray do not blame the family. If you desire a worthy, beautiful wife, a true flower of London to stand by your side." She gave Isabella a gentle push forward. Isabella fluttered her wide, doe-like eyes, smiling demurely as she dipped into a slight curtsy before Hastings, showcasing her cleavage beneath the blue silk. Hastings looked at Isabella, his lecherous eyes instantly lighting up as he swallowed hard. He stroked his chin, laughing basely. "Very well, I have always been a generous man. If the Vance family agrees, I shall marry Lady Isabella. Her beauty might just be enough to compensate for that deceitful dowry." "Praise the Lord. Thank you, my Lord Baron." Lady Vance cried out in joy, making no effort to hide her jubilation. Hastings turned back to Eleanor, pointing a fat finger at her face. "As for her, she is not even fit to carry the train of my future wife's gown." A piece of discarded rubbish, Eleanor stood utterly abandoned in the center of the chapel. Her entire family had turned their backs on her. Her fiancé had rejected her to choose her sister right before the altar of God. The bouquet of wildflowers in her hand was gripped so tightly that the sharp thorns pierced through her thin, silk gloves. Fresh blood seeped out, dripping crimson droplets onto the white stone floor. But instead of collapsing or fleeing, Eleanor held her head high. Her eyes, as deep blue as the sky before a tempest, blazed with an unyielding pride. She looked straight into Hastings' eyes, her voice ringing out clear, sharp, and terrifyingly calm throughout the chapel. "You are indeed unworthy to marry me, my Lord Baron." Her words were like the slash of a silver sword. A man who trades his honor to buy an empty title. A coward who only knows how to use the vulnerability of others as a stepping stone for his own grotesque arrogance, has no right to speak of worthiness. The chapel fell deathly silent. Not a single lady dared to flutter her fan. Shock was painted plainly across their faces. A ruined girl actually dared to insult a baron before the Tun. Hastings' face went from purple to a ghostly white with rage. He raised his hand, roaring like a maddened beast. "You bitch. You dare speak to me like that." He lunged forward to deliver a crushing blow to her face. But his hand never reached Eleanor's cheek. A sharp, low sound echoed from the back of the chapel. The strike of a silver-headed cane against the stone floor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was not loud, but it carried a suffocating pressure, crushing all noise, freezing all movement. The temperature in the chapel suddenly plummeted several degrees. "What right does an empty-headed baron have to touch my future duchess?" Chapter 2: The Duke's Recognition. The entire St. George's Chapel held its breath, every eye simultaneously turned toward the back, to where the sound had originated. From the shadows of the last pews beneath the gloomy stone arches, a man stepped forward. His footsteps were unhurried, but with every strike of his cane against the stone, the air seemed to be siphoned away. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a wide path. No one dared to block his way, no one even dared to breathe heavily. It was Arthur Stirling, the Duke of Wycliffe, the man known by the moniker that terrified all of London, the Iron Duke. He was dressed in a pitch-black wool greatcoat without a single crease, his ash-gray cravat tied to perfection, accentuating his towering, imposing stature and shoulders as broad as a fortress wall. His chiseled face was as cold as carved marble. In the dim light of the chapel, one could clearly see a faint scar trailing from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, the mark of bloody battles at Waterloo. His eyes were ash-gray, deep and tranquil, yet harboring the ruthlessness of a general accustomed to deciding the life and death of tens of thousands. Arthur had never attended any of the frivolous social events of the Tun. He loathed the superficial balls and the sordid, transactional marriages. His presence here today was entirely coincidental, merely a clandestine meeting with a bishop regarding land disputes in Parliament. He had been standing in the shadows from the beginning, witnessing this entire wretched play. At first, he felt nothing but contempt and was prepared to turn his back and leave. But when he heard Eleanor's voice, when he heard the way she articulated her sharp, precise words to strike back at Hastings, a flash of lightning tore through his memories, anchoring him to the spot. That voice, that rigorous, calm, and icy sentence structure, It did not belong to a foolish country girl. It was identical to the prose found in the tactical deciphering letters of a mysterious translator under the pseudonym E.V. 2 years ago on the Iberian Peninsula, that very translator had sent classified documents analyzing the vulnerabilities in the French cavalry formations, helping him avoid a bloody ambush and saving the lives of tens of thousands of British soldiers. Arthur had utilized his entire intelligence network to search for E.V. For the past 2 years, to think that the savior he sought, the brilliant mind he had always admired, was standing right here in a frayed wedding gown, being humiliated by a piece of aristocratic trash. Arthur stepped up to the altar. His imposing height blocked the light from the stained glass windows from reaching Hastings. Baron Hastings trembled violently, cold sweat drenching his forehead as his lips stammered and he backed away. Your Grace, what did you say?" Arthur ignored the man completely. To him, Hastings was less than a speck of dust, his ash-gray eyes pierced through the crowd, locking onto Eleanor. He saw the angry red mark on her cheek, saw the blood seeping from the hand clutching the wildflowers. But above all, he saw the unbreakable pride in her deep blue eyes. She did not cry, she did not kneel to beg for forgiveness, nor did she despair. He removed his black leather gloves, then slowly took off his wool greatcoat. With a decisive yet deeply controlled movement, he stepped forward, gently draping his heavy, warm coat over Eleanor's trembling but resolute shoulders. The coat was far too large for her, enveloping her small frame like an impenetrable shield. The scent of pine and frankincense wafted from the fabric, enveloping her senses and calming her erratic heartbeat. "A young lady bearing the name Vance is not worthy of your concern, Your Grace." Viscount Vance hurriedly stepped forward, rubbing his hands together obsequiously, his face displaying a sickeningly sycophantic expression. "She is a disgrace, a stain upon my family. If you require silence," Arthur commanded. Just one word, spoken softly without needing to raise his voice, yet it held such absolute authority that Viscount Vance snapped his mouth shut, his knees shaking so violently he nearly collapsed. Arthur looked down straight into Eleanor's eyes. The distance between them was so close that she could see her own reflection in his ash-colored gaze. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice loud enough, echoing enough, for all those who had just mocked her, from Hastings to her stepsister, to hear every syllable clearly. "It appears this chapel is fully prepared, the priest is present, and I by chance am currently in need of a wife to silence the complaints of Parliament. Will you agree to leave with me?" The entire chapel felt as if it had been struck by an earthquake. Murmurs erupted, only to be instantly choked off by fear. The Iron Duke, the most eligible, powerful, and ruthless bachelor in England, was proposing to a girl who had just been jilted. Eleanor looked up at him. There was no pity in those ash-gray eyes. He did not look at her like a pitiful creature in need of salvation. He was offering a proposition, a fair, cold, and rational transaction. She understood his unspoken meaning, a marriage of convenience to shield him from political entanglements, and in return, she would gain ultimate protection. She cast a glance at Hastings' waxen face, at Isabella's face twisted with maddened jealousy, and at her parents' sheer terrified shock. In that moment, all the pain and humiliation she had just endured seemed to vanish. She would never have to bow her head to anyone ever again. Eleanor let go of the blood-stained wildflowers. They fell to the red carpet without a sound. She slowly raised her trembling hand, placing it into the large, rough, sword-calloused palm of the Duke of Wycliffe. "I accept, Your Grace." Her voice was clear, without a single falter. Arthur gave her hand a slight squeeze, a firm reassurance. He turned to the priest who stood petrified on the altar and issued a command: "Perform the ceremony. Right now, and skip the rambling, get straight to the vows." The priest hastily flipped through the Bible. Sweating profusely, the wedding proceeded in a suffocatingly tense atmosphere. Hundreds of the Tons aristocrats sat below like statues. No one dared to leave, no one dared to speak. Hastings and the Vance family stood frozen in a corner, gritting their teeth as they watched the girl they had just discarded like rubbish, now exchanging vows with a man whose shoes they were not even fit to shine. "By the power vested in me by God, I pronounce you husband and wife," the priest hastily concluded, his voice trembling. Your Grace may kiss the bride." Arthur did not kiss her, his restraint was absolute. He merely gave a slight nod, wrapped an arm around Eleanor's waist, supporting her back so she would not collapse from exhaustion. "Let us leave," he said softly, meant only for her ears. 15 minutes later, Lady Eleanor descended the stone steps of St. George's Chapel. She stepped over the crushed remains of the wildflowers, leaving behind the ultimate humiliation. She was no longer a discarded bride of the Vance family. She was now Her Grace, the Duchess of Wycliffe. A gleaming black carriage bearing the Wycliffe crest, a crowned wolf, was already waiting. The coachman opened the door, bowing low to the ground. Arthur assisted Eleanor into the carriage, then stepped in after her. The carriage door slammed shut, leaving behind an earth-shattering shockwave that would sweep through every corner of London's high society for months to come. Chapter 3. The contract in the carriage. Inside the luxurious carriage of the Wycliffe family, lined with deep red velvet, the silence was so absolute that one could hear the snow pattering against the roof. A compact charcoal heater placed in the corner radiated a comforting warmth, dispelling the biting London chill, yet it could not banish the cold emanating from the man sitting opposite. Eleanor sat huddled in the corner of the seat, her hands still hidden within Arthur's pitch-black wool greatcoat. The strong scent of pine and frankincense enveloped her, unfamiliar, yet offering a strange sense of security. She had just married the Iron Duke, a man famous for his ruthlessness on the battlefield as well as in commerce, a man possessing no heart, who despised women and had never revealed a single emotional vulnerability to the public. She stole a glance at him, through the dim light cast by the carriage lantern outside. Arthur's eyes were closed, his head resting against the leather upholstery. His chiseled profile was sharp, the faint scar at the corner of his left eye only intensifying his deadly aura. As if sensing her gaze, Arthur's eyes snapped open. The ash-gray irises bored straight into her, devoid of any tenderness expected from a newlywed husband. He pulled a sheaf of parchment from his coat pocket and placed it onto the small folding mahogany table between them. The rustle of paper shattered the silence. "Read," he commanded tersely, his tone dripping with the absolute authority of a general. Eleanor frowned slightly, but obediently slipped her hands from the coat and picked up the paper. In the weak light, lines of handwriting in black ink, slanted, swift, yet incredibly sharp, came into view. It was a draft of a marriage settlement. As she scanned the clauses, surprise gradually filled her deep blue eyes. According to the document, she would receive a staggering allowance of pin money amounting to £5,000 per annum, a sum that even the most affluent duchesses would envy. She was granted full authority to manage the staff at the Wycliffe estate, and would be provided a private account at the Royal Bank. No one, not the Vance family nor Baron Hastings, would be permitted to interfere or demand coin from her. However, the latter portion of the settlement consisted of chillingly cold stipulations. She must play the role of a flawless duchess at social events, silencing all rumors that the Duke was being pressured by the Dowager Duchess into marrying a foreign princess for political gain. She was absolutely forbidden from interfering in his political affairs or personal life. And the final clause, underlined twice, never demand affection, romance, or the production of an heir. Eleanor set the paper back on the table. She looked Arthur straight in the eye, her voice steady and betraying no emotion. "You chose me solely because you require a political shield, Your Grace?" Arthur leaned back, intertwining his 10 fingers. "You are an intelligent woman, Eleanor. Look at the facts. You are practical enough to know that in this world, there is no prince on a white steed coming to rescue a princess out of love at first sight. I need a wife with no formidable family backing, no political ambition, and clever enough not to cause trouble or be swayed by factions. Meanwhile, you were cornered by your family, your reputation ruined. You need my protection to survive. We both gain what we desire. It is a fair transaction. Is there something else you have not told me?" She tilted her head, her sharp gaze scrutinizing his face. "A duke as powerful as you could easily hire some impoverished aristocratic widow to play the role of a wife. Why choose a girl embroiled in scandal, only to invite trouble from the ton?" A flash of surprise mingled with amusement flickered in Arthur's eyes, but he masked it instantly. He recalled the sharp, tactical, deciphering letters from the Iberian Peninsula. He decided not to expose her identity as Evie just yet. He wanted to see how much pressure the resilient girl before him could withstand, whether she truly possessed the brilliant mind he had so admired. "You overestimate the ton, and you underestimate my power, Eleanor," he lowered his voice. A solid, ruthless promise. "If you play your part well, Wycliffe shall be your impenetrable fortress. Not a single soul in London will dare look down upon you, not your father, nor that rubbish baron. Anyone who dares breathe a word of what transpired at the chapel today, I will erase their lineage from the economic map of England." He leaned forward, closing the distance. "But remember, do not attempt to breach the boundaries I have set. Do not expect a heart from a man who possesses none." Eleanor drew a deep breath. His brutal honesty, strangely enough, made her feel more at ease than pretty lies. She took the quill from the small inkwell in the carriage, calmly dipped it, and signed her name on the settlement. Her handwriting was elegant and decisive. She looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, not yielding an inch. "I will be the Duchess you require, my lord, but I have one condition as well." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Speak. I am not a decorative ornament for your drawing room, nor a puppet for you to string along. I will manage the Wycliffe estate in my own manner, and I will defend this title with my own honor, rather than hiding behind you, waiting to be sheltered." Arthur retrieved the document, the corner of his lips twitching upward into an exceedingly rare smile. A genuine smile, albeit fleeting. "I look forward to it, Duchess. Chapter 4. Control and the Fractures Within the Estate. The Wycliffe estate was situated in Mayfair, the most exclusive district in London. It was a colossal mansion built of grey stone, boasting imposing Gothic columns. The residence was as cold and silent as its master. During the first week following the wedding, Eleanor scarcely saw Arthur. He departed at the crack of dawn to attend tense sessions at the House of Lords, and only returned late at night, carrying the scent of cigar smoke and the biting frost. Yet his power was omnipresent, enveloping her every passing second. When Viscount Vance, driven by his bottomless greed, dared to send threatening letters demanding maintenance under the guise of having raised the Duchess, he was met personally by Mr. Barnes Wycliffe's fiercely loyal Scottish head butler. Right before the Vance household staff, Barnes coldly tossed the letters into the fireplace, delivering a stern declaration. The Duke's orders. "Anyone bearing the name Vance who attempts to approach or harass Her Grace shall face the Wycliffe Guard and be stripped of their remaining estates." From that day on, the Vance family remained as silent as the grave. When a few conservative noblewomen attempted to socially boycott Eleanor by withholding their calling cards for morning calls, Arthur did not fly into a rage or hurl insults. Instead, he quietly ordered the withdrawal of all Wycliffe investments from the banks, managed by those ladies' husbands. By the very next afternoon, calling cards were piled sky-high on the silver tray by the mansion's entrance. Feigned apologies accompanied by outrageously expensive baskets of roses arrived in droves. Eleanor understood that the Iron Duke's vengeance never relied on fists or cheap threats. He punished with economic and social might, crushing his enemies' windpipes before they even had the chance to speak. However, her life within the estate was exceedingly lonely. To pass the time, Eleanor often buried herself in Wycliffe's massive library, a sanctuary housing thousands of priceless tomes and ancient scrolls from all across Europe. Driven by her passion for linguistics and translation, she began personally organizing the Latin and Old French texts. Late one evening, as the autumn rain pattered incessantly against the reinforced glass windows of the library, Eleanor was deeply engrossed in translating a Roman military chronicle. The sallow candlelight flickered against her cheekbones. Suddenly the library door swung open. Arthur walked in. He was not wearing his greatcoat, and his cravat had been loosely untied. He looked unusually haggard. The scar on his face twitched relentlessly, his ash-gray eyes squeezed shut in agony. It was the manifestation of a severe headache, the lingering trauma from a piece of shrapnel that had grazed his skull on the Iberian battlefield years ago. He paused when he saw the candlelight on Eleanor's desk, frowning and intending to turn back to conceal his vulnerability. "Stay," Eleanor spoke up, her soothing voice blending with the sound of the rain. She did not look up at him, purposefully allowing him to retain his last shred of pride. "This library is vast enough for the both of us. I shall not disturb you." Arthur hesitated for a heartbeat. Her stillness, instead of rushing over with frantic inquiries like the royal physicians did, brought him a sense of peace. He walked over to the leather armchair in the corner and slumped into it. He closed his eyes, massaging his temples forcefully, trying to banish the piercing ringing in his eardrums. A moment later, he caught the faint scent of gardenia, not the overpowering powdery perfume of London ladies, but pure and natural. He cracked an eye open. Eleanor was standing beside him, placing a steaming porcelain cup onto the small side table. "Chamomile tea, with a hint of ash tree root bark and mint," she said softly, nudging the cup slightly toward him. "It will help soothe the strained nerves. My mother used to brew it for my father whenever his head ached." Arthur looked down at the tea, then at the hand resting on the arm of his chair. In aristocratic circles, a woman's hands were meant to be pampered with sheep's tallow, flawlessly soft. But Eleanor's hand bore a small callus on the index and middle fingers from holding a quill too often. It was the hand of a scholar of EV. not of an elite puppet. Suddenly, a yearning to touch that hand seized him. He reached out to take the cup. In a fleeting, accidental moment, his rough fingers brushed against her cold ones. A mild jolt of electricity surged up both their arms, but Arthur instantly recoiled as if burned, retreating back into his icy shell, reminding himself of the boundaries set within their contract. "Thank you," he said curtly, avoiding her gaze. "You need not fight alone all the time." "Your Grace," she said gently, her cadence like a lullaby, before turning back to her desk and resuming her translation. That night, the autumn rain continued to drizzle outside the window. For the first time in many years, Arthur Sterling was not awakened by nightmares of cannon fire and carnage on the battlefield. He fell asleep in the library armchair, embraced by the warmth of the chamomile tea, listening to the rhythmic rustle of pages being turned by his wife in name only. The chasm between two lonely islands had, invisibly, begun to fracture. Chapter 5: The social test at Almack's and the full scam, the London season, officially commenced, heralded by spring showers and the bustling arrival of gilded carriages converging on King Street. Tonight marked the first ball at Almack's, the seat of ultimate power in London's high society, governed by the formidable council of patronesses. Anyone denied vouchers to Almack's was essentially exiled from polite society forever. Her appearance at Almack's tonight would serve as Eleanor's first social test as the Duchess of Wycliffe. She was adorned in a deep blue satin gown that perfectly matched the color of her eyes. The design lacked the frivolous ruffles or flamboyant French lace of the current fashion. Instead, it was exquisitely tailored, emphasizing her proud, swan-like neck. The sole focal point was a solid emerald necklace, a priceless heirloom reserved exclusively for the mistress of the Wycliffe lineage, resting quietly against her collarbone. Arthur stood beside her. For the first time, the Iron Duke was seen wearing evening dress with a pitch-black velvet tailcoat, rather than his rigid military uniforms. He was towering, imposing, and exuded an undercurrent of danger that made others instinctively step out of his path. When the announcer bellowed, "The Duke and Duchess of Wycliffe," the music from the orchestra playing a waltz seemed to falter for a beat. Hundreds of curious, scrutinizing, and envious eyes darted toward the main entrance. Whispers buzzed like a disturbed hornet's nest. They gossiped about the bride picked up at the chapel, speculating on the truth behind the swift marriage of the cold-blooded Duke. Eleanor took a deep breath. She could feel the heat radiating from Arthur's hand hovering just behind her waist. It did not make full contact, but it was close enough to forge an invisible shield. She held her head high and descended the red-carpeted grand staircase. For the first hour, Eleanor's conduct was flawless. She calmly received social greetings, employing sharp, incisive language to parry the subtly mocking inquiries of the noblewomen. She declined inappropriate dance invitations with a faint but resolute smile, embodying the perfect demeanor of a duchess who could not be diminished. But storms never truly lay dormant in London. When Arthur was pulled aside to a corner of the room by the Foreign Secretary to discuss a trade treaty, Eleanor decided to make her way to the refreshment table for a glass of lemonade. Just then, Baron Hastings emerged from behind a folding screen. Accompanying him were Eleanor's stepsister Isabella and Lady Vance. Hastings deliberately chose the moment Eleanor stood alone, surrounded by a crowd of eager, eavesdropping aristocrats. "Look who we have here." The exalted Duchess. Hastings' gruff voice boomed, intentionally loud to draw the attention of bystanders. He had just downed a glass of strong spirits. His breath reeked of cheap cigars and hard liquor. "Do you all know, the lady standing before you was once discarded by me at St. George's Chapel. Why, you ask? Because of her loose, wanton ways." Isabella hid half her face behind her fan, feigning horror while her eyes glinted with malice. "Oh, Sister Eleanor, have you still not abandoned your promiscuous habits? Back at the Yorkshire estate, everyone knew you were constantly sneaking about with the stable boy. Poor Duke, you must have used some dark sorcery to beguile him." Malicious whispers erupted around them, a mix of shock and schadenfreude. Several ladies covered their mouths, taking several steps back from Eleanor as if she carried a deadly contagion. To be accused of unchastity was a death sentence for a woman's honor in Regency society. The humiliation, much like the ghost from the chapel, was once again crashing down upon her head. Hastings took a step forward, laughing coarsely as he reached out a fat hand, intending to grab Eleanor's chin. "I wager this wench must have snuck into the Duke's bed before." Eleanor did not back away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she did not tremble in the slightest. She held her head high, looking straight into Hastings' face. Her deep blue eyes were as freezing as a frozen lake. A man who smuggles weapons to the French via the port of Dover, embezzling royal tax coin to buy an empty baronetcy like yourself. Lord Hastings, Eleanor's voice rang out, crystal clear yet as sharp as a razor, piercing the eardrums of every gossipmonger present. What right, and what honor, do you possess to pass judgment on another's character? The entire crowd inhaled a sharp breath of cold air. An accusation of smuggling and treason was a monumental crime. Hastings' face drained of color, shifting from a flushed red to a ghastly pale. You bitch, you dare slander me with such lies. He roared, the veins bulging in his thick neck. Driven mad by alcohol and the utter humiliation of having his dark secret exposed, Hastings completely lost his reason. He raised his massive arm, using all his strength, aiming to deliver a devastating slap across Eleanor's face. But his hand was only halfway up, before it could even graze a single strand of her hair. A violent, unyielding force like iron pincers suddenly seized Hastings' wrist from behind. The sound of a bone being wrenched backward snapped dry and horrifyingly loud crack. Chapter 6, Absolute Protection, and the quote that shook London. Hastings let out a scream of bone-deep agony, his knees buckling as he collapsed onto the oak-paneled floor, cradling his freshly dislocated, dangling arm. Arthur Sterling stood towering behind Hastings. The murderous intent radiating from him was so thick and dangerous that the temperature in the vast ballroom seemed to drop below freezing. No one had seen him move or knew when he had arrived. The orchestra on the balcony abruptly ceased playing, the notes shattering mid-air. Not a single one of the hundreds of aristocrats present dared to breathe. Even the rustling of silk gowns fell dead silent. The entire room plunged into a deathly stillness. Arthur flicked the toe of his polished leather shoe, lightly kicking Hastings' corpulent body a bit further away, as if the man were a pile of rubbish obstructing his path. He drew a white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket, slowly wiping the hand that had just touched the Baron, and then let the handkerchief drop straight onto Hastings' face. Arthur's voice cut through. The timbre was low, not a shout, but it echoed into every hidden corner of the massive room. The icy calm in his voice was far more terrifying than any fit of rage. The manager of Almack's, an elderly gentleman usually known for his extreme arrogance, was now trembling, his face devoid of a single drop of blood. He scrambled forward, bowing so low his nose nearly touched his knees. Since when? Arthur narrowed his eyes, lightly tapping his silver-headed cane against the floor. Has Almack's, a place that proclaims itself the beating heart of the aristocracy, allowed some low-bred scum bearing an empty baronetcy to bark madly before my Duchess? My Lord Duke, the manager stammered, sweat drenching his brow. We did not foresee such a transgression. Hastings, clutching his broken arm and sobbing on the floor, managed to lift his head, using his last shred of pathetic pride to retaliate. Your Grace, you have been deceived by this woman. She is a wanton piece of rubbish. She has no right to step foot into high society. She has no right to be a duchess. Lady Vance and Isabella cowered in the corner, shaking uncontrollably, not daring to utter half a word in defense of their ally. Right? Arthur cut him off with a single word. He took a step forward, using his own towering frame to completely block the prying eyes of the crowd from Eleanor. He swept his gaze over the breathless mass of aristocrats, the very same people who just moments ago were ready to join in mocking his wife. His ash-gray eyes flashed with the absolute ruthlessness of an uncrowned king. He raised his voice, each word and syllable nailed into the space. She needs to prove her right to no one, for from this day forth her right is me. The quote exploded, embedding itself directly into the minds of everyone present. It was not merely a declaration of protection, but a public threat to the entirety of the ton. To cross Eleanor Vance was to cross Arthur Sterling. To touch the Duchess was to ignite a war with the Iron Duke. Arthur turned to the manager, issuing a command in a single breath. Revoke the Almack's vouchers of Hastings and the entire Vance family immediately. Throw them out of here, starting tomorrow. Any family that harbors, trades with, or sends calling cards to them will have all commercial and banking ties with Wycliffe severed. Social exile, the most brutal, most terrifying punishment for an aristocrat. Stripped of their Almack's vouchers and boycotted by Wycliffe, Hastings and the Vance family were effectively dead in terms of social and economic standing in England. Instantly, the Almack's guards rushed forward, dragging a screaming, begging Hastings out as if he were a stray dog. Lady Vance and Isabella, wailing loudly, were shoved out the back door in the most excruciatingly humiliating manner. Not a single soul in the aristocratic crowd dared to speak up to plead for them. Those who had mocked Eleanor moments ago now hastily backed away, bowing deeply as Arthur's gaze swept over them. In St. vast room, Arthur turned back to look at Eleanor. She remained standing tall, stubborn and proud, though the corners of her eyes were slightly red. Her resilience caused a strange ache in his chest, one that transcended all boundaries set by their contract. He gently offered his gloved hand to her, his stone-like expression seemingly softening just a fraction. "The first dance of the season, Duchess?" he asked softly. Eleanor took a deep breath, smiled, and placed her hand in his. The orchestra immediately struck up a waltz once more. In the very center of the Grand Hall of Almack's, the Duke and Duchess of Wycliffe danced. The entire ballroom parted, granting them a vast expanse of space full of reverence and fear. From this night on, the entirety of London society understood an immutable truth. Lady Eleanor's position as the Duchess of Wycliffe was absolutely untouchable. Chapter 7. The Secret Unveiled in the Library. The shockwave from the night at Almack's spread through London faster than a plague. Not a single gossip column failed to run headlines about the spectacular upheaval caused by the Iron Duke. Eleanor was now treated with reverence everywhere she went. When the carriage bearing the Wycliffe crest rolled down Bond Street, the very aristocrats who had once turned their faces away now doffed their hats in deference to her. Yet behind the solid oak doors of the Wycliffe estate, the relationship between her and Arthur was undergoing a subtle, silent but profound transformation. The icy fortress of the cold-blooded Duke was beginning to melt. He returned home earlier. The long silent dinners at opposite ends of a dining table, stretching dozens of meters, were now a thing of the past. Instead, Arthur ordered dinner to be served in the small library, where they sat across from one another, debating bills in the House of Lords and discussing ancient Roman history texts. Her presence in the house became the finest anodyne for his nightmares and the psychological scars of the battlefield. Late one evening, when the candle in the library had burned past its halfway mark, Eleanor had fallen asleep, her head resting on a pile of old French documents. Arthur entered the room and paused to gaze at her peaceful face. His chest ached with an unfamiliar sensation, tenderness. He recalled the day at the chapel, the night at Almack's. He had promised her a dispassionate marriage, yet he was the one violating that term with every passing second. He stepped forward, intending to carry her to bed. But the moment his hand brushed against her arm, Eleanor startled awake. She rubbed her eyes, finding him standing entirely too close. "I apologize, Your Grace." She hurriedly sat up straight, rearranging the parchment papers. "This document is quite difficult to translate. The syntax of 18th-century French military structure is rather convoluted." Arthur said nothing. His gaze swept over the pages covered densely in her handwriting. Then he silently walked to the corner of the room and unlocked the steel-reinforced safe. He drew out a stack of yellowed documents, sealed with the bright red wax of the British military, and placed them on the desk, right in front of Eleanor. Eleanor looked down, her pupils contracted. They were military tactical translations, and at the bottom of each page was a sharp, initialed signature. "EV 2 years ago on the battlefields of the Iberian Peninsula. These translations were sent anonymously to my command tent." Arthur spoke, his voice deep and warm, his eyes locking onto hers, leaving her no avenue of escape. They precisely analyzed every flaw in the French cavalry formations. Thousands of British soldiers, myself included, returned alive thanks to these pages. I have utilized my entire intelligence network to search for that brilliant translator for 2 years. Eleanor gave a slight start, her hands hidden beneath the desk clasping tightly together. "Then how did you, Eleanor Vance," Arthur said slowly, stepping around the desk to stand right beside her. "Right there at St. George's Chapel. The sentence structure you used to reprimand Hastings was exactly how you analyzed the French documents. Calm, logical, aiming straight at the core weakness without a single superfluous word. From that moment I knew. Why did you not tell me, Eleanor?" Eleanor lowered her head, biting her lip. "Because a woman meddling in royal military intelligence is convicted of treason, Your Grace. If discovered, I would be sent to the scaffold. I translated them only because I did not want British blood to be shed in vain on a hopeless battlefield. I did not require anyone to glorify me." Arthur let out a breath, his chest heaving with intense emotion. A young woman, hidden away in the countryside, had used a pen to save an entire empire, choosing silence for fear of the draconian laws enacted by foolish aristocrats. He gently lifted her chin, his rough fingers caressed her soft cheek. "You saved my life, Eleanor," he whispered, the distance between them reduced to a mere breath. You saved the Iron Duke, and I swear upon the honor of the House of Wycliffe, I shall dedicate my life to protecting that secret. No one is permitted to touch you." That was the moment when gratitude, admiration, and a profound flutter of the heart intertwined, bringing down every barrier between them. Arthur leaned down, but instead of an eager kiss fueled by lust, his lips gently pressed against her forehead, a kiss filled with absolute reverence, more sacred and profound than any vow made in a chapel. Chapter 8. The Ultimatum and the Escape in the Snow. However, secrets are things that can never truly rest in London, especially when they are wrapped in the machinations of power. The Dowager Duchess, the Queen Mother, who had always viewed the independence and power of the Duke of Wycliffe as a thorn in the royal side, had planted spies within the estate long ago. She knew Arthur was hiding something when he consistently shut down investigations into the identity of Evie. By bribing a former maid who had worked at the Vances' Yorkshire estate, the old woman had pieced the fragments together. That afternoon, while Arthur was in an emergency meeting at the War Office, a discreet royal carriage arrived at the gates of Wycliffe. Eleanor was invited to Buckingham Palace in a secluded silent room reeking of archaic incense. The Dowager Duchess sat upon a red velvet chair and tossed a copy of the translated document onto the table. "A clear case of treason, Lady Eleanor." The Dowager Duchess smiled coldly, the smile of a venomous viper. "The British Crown does not permit women to meddle in military affairs. Your unauthorized deciphering of classified documents, regardless of the outcome, is enough to have you beheaded on suspicion of being a double agent." Eleanor turned pale but maintained her proud, upright posture. "I did it for England." "The Duke of Wycliffe. Do not drag the Duke into this." The Dowager Duchess slammed her fan onto the table, cutting her off. "If you intend to lean on Wycliffe, then listen closely. If Arthur shields you, he will be charged as an accomplice. His dukedom will be stripped, all his properties and estates will be confiscated. His regiments will be disbanded, and your arrogant Iron Duke will rot in the Tower of London for harboring a spy." All the blood in Eleanor's veins seemed to freeze. She could face death, but she could not let Arthur, the man who had pulled her from the mud, the man who bore countless scars for England, lose everything because of her. The Dowager Duchess presented a decree of annulment, already bearing the royal seal. "I offer you a choice. Sign this paper. Confess that you used dark arts to deceive the Duke into marriage, and leave England immediately tonight, never to return. In exchange, I will bury the secret of Evie. If you refuse, a warrant for the arrest of you and Arthur Sterling will be issued tomorrow morning." That evening, London was battered by the first fierce blizzard of the season. Returning to the Wycliffe estate, Eleanor walked into the library. She saw Arthur asleep at his desk, his hand still holding a quill. His chiseled face looked so peaceful in sleep. The usual scowl lines were gone, and his guard was down. Eleanor's heart constricted, aching as if pierced by thousands of needles. She approached and stood looking at him for a long time, trying to carve every line of his face into her memory. She reached out, intending to trace the scar at the corner of his eye, but then pulled her hand back. She knew that if she woke him, he would use his power to protect her, he would stand against the crown, and he would lose everything. True love sometimes is not about being together, but about sacrificing oneself to preserve the entirety of the other. Eleanor took a piece of parchment and hastily penned a letter. "My Lord Duke, I have realized that I cannot endure the suffocating and scheming life of London high society. Our contract ends here. Do not look for me." She did not sign the Dowager Duchess's annulment paper. She would not sully his honor with lies. She would simply disappear. She unclasped the heirloom emerald necklace of the House of Wycliffe and placed it neatly upon the letter. She took nothing with her, not even a single coin from her private account. She wore only a frayed gray wool cloak, the attire of the common class. In the dead of night, while the entire estate slumbered, the Duchess of Wycliffe slipped quietly out the back door. She vanished into the blinding blizzard, boarding a shabby merchant carriage bound for the north of England. She left behind a love that had just begun to bloom, all to protect her uncrowned king. Chapter 9. The Chase in the Snow and the Wrath of a Demon. The following morning, the Wycliffe estate was engulfed in a terrifying silence. Arthur awoke in the library armchair to a bone-chilling cold. The fireplace had long since burned out. He stretched, intending to summon the butler for tea, when his eyes fell upon the letter, placed neatly on his desk, beside the emerald heirloom necklace sparkling in the pallid dawn light. His hand reached for the letter, his fingers trembling uncharacteristically. He scanned the brief, heartless words, A fury and panic unlike any he had ever known erupted in the chest of the Iron Duke, a sensation he had never experienced, even when staring down dozens of enemy cannons. He knew she was lying. Eleanor was not one to surrender. She had not fled out of fear of high society. She had fled because she was forced. He crushed the letter in his fist, his ash-gray eyes streaked with furious, blood-red lines. He immediately rang the bell, summoning the entire household staff. "Who saw the Duchess last evening?" His roar shook the very paintings on the walls. After a brief and violent interrogation, a trembling maid confessed that the Duchess had been taken to Buckingham Palace the previous afternoon. Without needing to hear another word, Arthur understood everything. The Dowager Duchess had intervened. They had used him to threaten her. "Saddle my horse." "The fastest black stallion in the stables," Arthur commanded, ignoring his throbbing headache. He did not bother with a thick greatcoat. Dressed exactly as he had been the night before, he rode out, tearing through the blinding snowstorm past the estate gates. Utilizing his supreme power, he mobilized his network of informants scattered across the toll houses on the outskirts of London. Finally, he determined the trajectory of a shabby merchant carriage, heading north toward Yorkshire. The black stallion neighed, its hooves trampling the thick snow. Arthur rode like a vengeful demon escaped from hell, ignoring the cold that threatened to freeze his very bones. After 4 hours of maddened pursuit, he finally spotted the carriage, stuck in a snowdrift on a desolate outskirt. Arthur reined in his horse, drew his cane, leapt down, and marched straight for the carriage. The coachman recoiled in terror, not daring to block the path of the nobleman radiating such murderous intent. He wrenched open the rotting wooden door of the carriage. Inside, Eleanor was huddled in a corner on a pile of straw, her lips pallid, her face bruised purple by the biting cold, her thin cloak wholly inadequate against the wind. When she saw Arthur standing there, his hair dusted with snow and his eyes bloodshot, she froze and tears instantly spilled down her cheeks. "You should not have come here," she screamed, her voice cracking from tears and the freezing cold. "If you come with me, the Dowager Duchess will destroy you. You will be stripped of everything." Arthur did not utter a single word. He tossed his cane aside, climbed into the cramped carriage, pulled her forcefully from the straw, and crushed her against his solid chest. His warmth enveloped her, the familiar scent of pine and frankincense driving away the freezing cold. "Do you think a damned dukedom, or a few tracts of lifeless land, are more important than you, Eleanor?" His voice was a hoarse tremble buried in her hair. "I have lived in hell. I have crawled out from beneath piles of corpses, and I swear to God, I will never let you fall down there alone. But the treason, the crown will bring you before the House of Lords." She sobbed, clinging tightly to his coat. "Let me handle it. I am the Iron Duke, have you forgotten?" He scooped her up in his arms and stepped out of the carriage. He wrapped her tightly in his own warm wool greatcoat, then hoisted her onto the horse, settling her snugly against his chest. He pulled the reins, turning the horse back south. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked, shivering. "Back to London." Arthur's eyes were as cold as millennial ice. "Damn the royal court, damn the Dowager Duchess. I will make every last one of them kneel at your feet." Chapter 10. The Truth at the House of Lords. And the vow of the proud Arthur did not take Eleanor back to the Wycliffe estate. He rode straight to the Houses of Parliament, the House of Lords, where the Dowager Duchess, the high-ranking peers, and the military generals were holding their regular session. Covered in snow, his hair disheveled, Arthur held Eleanor tightly with one arm, while with his free foot, he kicked open the massive oak doors of the House of Lords. The deafening crash made hundreds of lords and aristocrats jolt in surprise, turning as one. The Dowager Duchess, sitting in the seat of honor, shot to her feet upon seeing Arthur and Eleanor enter. A triumphant gleam was stark on her wrinkled face. "Duke of Wycliffe, how bold of you to bring a traitor into this hallowed hall." "Guards, seize them!" The guards hesitated, but a glare as sharp as a razor from Arthur nailed their feet to the floor. Slowly, he led Eleanor to the center of the circular chamber, where all the light converged. Arthur smiled coldly. It was the smile of a demon before devouring its prey. He drew a thick dossier from his breast pocket, sealed with the red wax of the French opposition, and slammed it onto the assembly table. "A traitor," Arthur's voice boomed, its power eclipsing all other sounds. "You mean Baron Hastings, the man you have constantly shielded and promoted?" The chamber erupted in whispers. The Dowager Duchess turned deathly pale. "Inside that dossier," Arthur pointed, Is all the correspondence proving Baron Hastings accepted French bribes to smuggle British military intelligence through the port of Dover. That is how he acquired the tens of thousands of pounds to buy his baronetcy. And he is the very man the Dowager Duchess used as a pawn to profit personally and subvert the power of Parliament. The declaration was a time bomb detonating in the House of Lords. The whispers turned into shouts of outrage, and this woman, Arthur pivoted, gripping Eleanor's hand and raising it high before the entire Parliament. Lady Eleanor Vance, my Duchess, writing under the pseudonym E.V., deciphered the entire French code. She uncovered Hastings' treasonous network and sent the classified intelligence that saved 50,000 British soldiers on the Iberian Peninsula. Not only did the Crown fail to honor her, but they intended to use cheap laws to convict her of treason, for daring to accomplish what hundreds of incompetent men in this room could not. The entire House of Lords erupted. The truth, brutally exposed, left no room for retreat. The military generals who had fought in Iberia, men bearing countless scars, stood up in unison. The oldest field marshal in England pushed back his chair, stepped out of line, and slowly bowed deeply, executing the highest military salute to Eleanor. Dozens of other generals immediately followed suit. Drained of all color, the Dowager Duchess collapsed back into her chair, knowing her political faction had utterly fallen, the royal honor dragged through the mud. No one dared whisper the word treason again. An arrest warrant for Baron Hastings was issued instantly. He would hang for true treason. The wind died down. The chaos in the House of Lords gradually subsided, giving way to a historic silence. Arthur Sterling, the proudest man in England, a man who had never bowed before the king or God, slowly turned to face Eleanor. Amidst the astonished gazes of the most powerful elite in the kingdom, the Iron Duke took a slow step backward and went down on one knee on the granite floor. He took her freezing hand, pressing it against his rough cheek. His ash-gray eyes no longer held any coldness or cruelty. They contained only a profound tenderness, as radiant as the dawn. "The marriage contract in the carriage that day is null and void," Arthur said, his voice deep and sincere, shattering the final icy walls of his heart. "Eleanor, I do not need a political shield. I do not need a wife in name only. I need the only woman who can make my heart beat again. I need you, be my true Duchess." Tears burst forth on Eleanor's face. All the injustice, the humiliation at St. George's Chapel, all the terror and the blizzard were washed away by the warmth from his palm. She smiled radiantly, nodding through her sobs. "I accept, Arthur." 1 month later, the Vance family was exiled from London, drowning in debt and implicated in Hastings' crimes. Viscount Vance and Lady Vance were forced to live in hiding in a filthy suburb. Meanwhile, at the Wycliffe estate in Mayfair, the young Duchess held her husband's hand as they stepped out onto the second-floor balcony, awash in bright light. On the street below, dozens of torches illuminated the night sky. The entirety of London's high society, the very people who had once turned their backs and scorned her, had gathered voluntarily, bowing as one to offer their blessings to the mysterious hero and the Duchess of the Iron Duke. The cheers echoed through every corner of London, and the Ton would forever remember. Her worth came not merely from the most powerful man in England wrapping his arm around her, but from her own brilliance, resilience, and magnificent heart. Chapter 11, Epilogue. The Duchess of Wycliffe. The harsh winter had passed, making way for a brilliant, warm spring that awakened across the foggy Isle. The Wycliffe estate in Mayfair was no longer a cold grey stone mansion, as silent as an ancient tomb. The heavy pitch-black velvet curtains that once shrouded the Gothic reinforced windows had been taken down, replaced by sheer cream-colored silk that allowed the sunlight to flood every corner of the house. The once dark walls were adorned with vibrant landscape paintings, and Venetian crystal vases overflowed with fragrant gardenias and lilies. Vitality was blossoming everywhere, and the source of that miraculous revival was none other than the new mistress of the house, Her Grace, the Duchess of Wycliffe. Eleanor sat in her private study, a sunlit room adjoining the massive library. She wore a jade-green muslin silk gown, her chestnut hair neatly braided and tied with a silk ribbon. Before her lay stacks of accounting ledgers and reports from the estate managers in Yorkshire, Cornwall, and Devon. Since officially taking control of the internal management of the Wycliffe household, she had proven to the entire aristocracy that she was not merely a bride picked up at a chapel, nor just a deciphering hero, but a true noblewoman with extraordinary administrative talent. She had personally dismissed 3 fraudulent managers in the South, men who had colluded to embezzle a third of the revenues from Wycliffe's open-pit mines. She had ordered the complete reconstruction of the housing systems for the tenant laborers on the rural estates and established small schools to teach their children to read. With her sharp intellect and deep understanding of numbers and complex legal clauses, Eleanor had increased Wycliffe's revenue by 20% in just 3 short months. The elite of the ton, who had once feared the power of the Iron Duke, now genuinely admired and respected the young Duchess's brilliance. The study door gently opened. Mr. Barnes, the gray-haired Scottish head butler who was always impeccably groomed, entered carrying a silver tray laden with dozens of calling cards. "My lady," Mr. Barnes bowed respectfully, his voice filled with pride. "Here is the list of families requesting an audience for morning calls. There is even a card from the Prime Minister's wife and—" He cleared his throat, concealing a small smile. "The Marquis of Devonshire's estate has sent an apology for the previous incident, earnestly inviting you to attend their charity tea party." Eleanor took a sip of hot camel tea, her eyes scanning the gold-embossed calling cards. She recalled her first days in London, when these cards were an unimaginable luxury, when she was chased away like a plague carrier, and when her stepmother and stepsister, Isabella, had used every scheme to push her into the mud. Now, the very people who had mocked her were clamoring for the chance to exchange social pleasantries with her. "Decline the Prime Minister's wife. State that I am occupied reviewing the charity budget for the orphanage on the East End," Eleanor said calmly. "As for the Devonshire family, send them a polite letter, gently reminding them that the Marchioness's malicious gossip regarding dowerless young ladies last month has not been forgotten. Wycliffe does not associate with those who enjoy using the honor of others as a laughingstock." "Yes, my lady, most astute." Mr. Barnes bowed, turning to leave before pausing to smile. "The Duke has returned, Your Grace." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Ever since the night at the House of Lords, her relationship with Arthur had transcended the boundaries of a contract to become a profound love, forged in blood, tears, and sacrifice. London's ruthless, cold-blooded Iron Duke was now merely a proud general kneeling at her feet. The sound of firm footsteps echoed down the marble hallway. The door swung open. Arthur Sterling strode in. He had just returned from a horseback inspection of the guards on the outskirts. He wore a leather riding habit, his cravat loose, his dark hair slightly windswept. The sunlight illuminated the faint scar at the corner of his eye, which did not diminish his dangerous aura, but only enhanced his untamed appeal. The moment he saw Eleanor, his chiseled face instantly softened. All the tension and inherent coldness of a politician were entirely stripped away. He took long strides toward her, reaching around the back of her chair to embrace her from behind. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply the pure scent of gardenia. "Which earl or duke have you made break into a cold sweat today, my Duchess?" Arthur whispered, his voice a low rumble, his thin lips grazing her collarbone. Eleanor chuckled softly, tilting her head to revel in his closeness. She reached up, gently stroking his tousled hair. "Just a few minor issues with the financial reports from the Cornwall mines." The overseers seemed to have forgotten that their Duchess can read the language of numbers. "Fools," Arthur laughed darkly. "I should have a few of them hanged to set an example. You must stop threatening to kill people at the slightest provocation, Duke of Wycliffe." She patted the back of his hand, her tone laced with sweet reproach. "We have laws, and I have already forwarded the files to the constabulary. Economic punishment is always more painful and effective than a noose." Arthur spun her chair around, lifted her effortlessly, and settled her firmly onto his lap. He locked her securely in his strong embrace. His ash-gray eyes gazed deeply into hers, no longer hiding a fraction of the fierce passion and devotion he harbored for this woman. "You have always been smarter than me, Eleanor," he said, his fingers trailing lightly down her spine, causing her to shiver slightly. "Sometimes I wonder how I managed to survive all those dark years before you walked into that chapel that day. Did you not promise in the contract that we were never permitted to speak of such ridiculous romantic notions?" Eleanor playfully reminded him of the old clause, her eyes dancing with teasing mirth. "Whoever wrote that idiotic contract, I will have him torn into 100 pieces," Arthur replied without hesitation, before leaning down to capture her lips. It was a deep, passionate, and fierce kiss, holding all the longing suppressed during those exhausting slow-burn days. His kiss tasted of the cold wind, mint, and an absolute possessiveness. She wrapped her arms around his neck, responding with equal fervor. There was no distance between them anymore, no disparity in status, no political schemes or malicious gossip. There were only two souls who had found each other in the midst of a storm. When they finally broke apart to catch their breath, Arthur rested his forehead against hers, his breath hot. "I have finalized all the proceedings with the court," he spoke, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "All the remaining assets of the Vance family, including that rotting estate in Yorkshire, have been seized to pay off their unpayable debts. Viscount Vance and his wife are now toiling in a sweatshop in the suburbs. As for your stepsister Isabella, I hear she was forced into a hasty marriage with a stingy, senile sheep merchant in the north to escape her debts." Eleanor sighed softly, but there was no pity in her eyes. Those who had discarded her at the altar, those who had humiliated and schemed to trample her, had finally received their rightful punishment through karma. She no longer hated them, because they were no longer worth her concern. "You have done so much for me, Arthur," she murmured, her finger tracing aimless patterns on his chest. "I have not done enough," he asserted firmly. He reached into his inner pocket, retrieved a small black velvet box, and flipped it open. Inside sat a white gold ring, set with a flawlessly cut diamond that sparkled like the stars in an eternal night sky. Eleanor was stunned. That day in the chapel, I failed to give you a proper wedding ring. I only used a worn signet ring hastily pulled from my own hand." Arthur took her left hand, removed the old ring, and slowly slid the new diamond ring onto her ring finger. It fit perfectly. Eleanor Sterling, he called her name, the syllables ringing with devotion. "This ring does not represent the House of Wycliffe. It represents Arthur, my heart, my life, all my pride belong to you forever." Eleanor looked at the sparkling ring on her hand, then into the sincere eyes of the cold-blooded Duke. She knew that the King of London's high society had completely surrendered, and she, the once abandoned bride, had now become the true queen of his life. "I belong to you as well, Arthur," she smiled, tears of happiness brimming in her eyes, before leaning up to kiss him once more. The spring sunlight streamed through the glass windows, casting warm rays upon the two figures intertwined in the library. Outside the Wycliffe estate, the world continued to turn. The schemes and calculations of the Tun would never truly cease. But here, within this impenetrable fortress, under the protection of the Iron Duke, their love would forever remain the most beautiful legend that London high society had ever witnessed. A legend of a girl who never bowed her head, and the man who used the entire world to lift her up.